Story 1. Quicksand seemed to appear in every cartoon, movie, and video game. I thought it was a common thing I needed to watch out for in life. Years later, I have never encountered it. Story 2. Seriously, this sounds bad, but it was something that used to scare me a lot as a child. People with Down syndrome. Story 3. When I was a child, I believed that if I didn't jump into bed quickly after turning off the lights, something under the bed would grab my ankles. Story 4. My dresser. The knobs looked like eyeballs, and I thought they would stretch out and grab me when I walked by. Story 5. My mother told me to jump to get off escalators. She warned me that my feet would get caught in the escalator otherwise. Story 6. There was a restaurant in my hometown that specialized in seafood, and it featured a statue of a dancing lobster right inside the front door. For some reason, I was terrified of it. I still loved the restaurant, so my dad would have to cover my eyes as we walked in. Story 7. When I was a child, I once grabbed a handful of ornamental long grass and tried to pull it out of the ground. Instead, I accidentally sliced my hand open on it. I ran inside to show my parents, but I was too afraid to admit how I got hurt because we weren't supposed to tear up the landscaping. I was terrified that I had somehow been poisoned by the plant and would die. I was about 5 years old, worried that I had to keep the secret that I was dying from a mysterious plant. Story 8. Those neighborhood watch signs featuring a creepy figure always made me think they were a warning about someone unusual in the area. However, they are just a general warning. Story 9. A porch light on the house across the street. When I was 5 years old, I had a dream that the light would somehow detach from its socket, fly across the street, and press itself against my bedroom window, then suddenly illuminate in the middle of the night. I would cower in fear whenever that light turned on. Thankfully, it was incredibly rare, but it was a big shock. I finally managed to overcome this fear at 15 years old when the neighbor who owned the house allowed me to flip the switch that controlled that light. Additionally, on an unusual day when the light was on for the entire day, my favorite football team blew out its opponent, so now I consider it good luck when the light is on. Story 10. Emus. My neighbors had them in their yard, and I was terrified of them. I would have nightmares. I had to walk by them every day to get to the bus stop, and some days it was still dark in the morning, so I would be running. Story 11. Alice in Wonderland is a Disney animated movie that scared me. Even today, I feel uncomfortable when I see images related to the story, such as the statue in Central Park. Story 12. The threat of death in video games made me think that if I didn't pause the game before turning off the console, my character would be left alone and unable to defend themselves. Story 13. My childhood home's toilet had strange lighting that made the room resemble a scene from a mummy movie. The shadows created the illusion that the ceiling had a door directly above the toilet seat. As a child, I always looked up when using the toilet because I was afraid a mummy would fall through that shadowy door and grab me. Seemed silly, but that fear haunted me until junior high. Story 14. My Teddy Ruxpin was loved during the day, but he had a short in the speaker and would talk at night, which was very scary. Story 15. I had a brief but intense fear of having a bowel movement. I do not recommend this experience at all. I felt unwell from being unable to go. Story 16. Being afraid of being called overweight was something I experienced as a child. I was always a chubby kid, and I dreaded that word. It's unfair how children can be mistreated. Story 17. Octopus. I watched the movie Aliens probably too young as a kid, and the xenomorph that wrapped around your face freaked me out. I associated that with octopuses, squids, and even stingrays and thought it would happen to me. It was wild because I grew up in the upper Midwest surrounded by cornfields. Story 18. I used to think that if you got stung by a jellyfish, your body would be in a vegetative state while your consciousness was trapped inside the jellyfish. Story 19. I was terrified of Shaggy's song, It Wasn't Me, as a child because I thought the lyrics mentioned being locked in the bathroom, which was a significant fear of mine for some reason. I would cry when that song played. Obviously, no one could explain the actual lyrics to me. Keep in mind, I was only 3 when that song was released. I still can't listen to it. Story 20. I really thought quicksand would be a bigger problem for me 32 years later, and I've never encountered it. Story 21. Robert Stack convinced me that if I looked up at the sky after midnight, I would see a UFO. Therefore, I refused to look outside late at night. Story 22. Watching The Labyrinth and Alice in Wonderland. My brother lost me in a Kmart when I was 5. After that, any movie where a child is lost frightened me. Story 23. The Rapture. I was raised in a fundamentalist evangelical Baptist church. Once my mother pointed out a double rainbow, and I had a panic attack because I thought it was a sign that the rapture was imminent. My parents called our youth pastor, who came over and prayed with me. I got saved repeatedly. It never felt genuine, and I worried constantly that I wasn't truly saved. I have been free from that delusion for decades now. It's all false. Story 24. I visited a farm once and saw large bulls in the paddock. One night, I woke up frightened that they were going to charge through the door and run into my room. Story 25. Sitting in a convertible and looking up at the sky while the vehicle was in motion always felt like I was going to be sucked into space. Story 26. As a young child, I became frightened by something I was watching and turned off the television. It then turned itself back on a moment later. Until I was about 18, if I was in a room with a screen, I felt the need to cover it with a towel. Occasionally, when I am in a hotel room, I find myself thinking, what if this turns on by itself? Story 27. A pile of clean clothes on my chair looks like a monster trying to get me once I turn off the lights. Story 28. Turning on the light in the car while someone was driving made me believe it would cause an accident or get us pulled over and jailed. Story 29. The automatic Skype profile picture, resembling the outline of a person, combined with the Skype ringtone, would give me countless nightmares. Story 30. It was the late 1990s, and I convinced my mom to let me watch the animated Ghostbusters series that was out. All night, I thought ghosts were trying to get into my room because I saw eyes peeking in. The eyes I was seeing were just the window latch creeping through the blinds. Story 31. I refused to step on grass after dark after watching An American Werewolf in London because of the opening scene where they are told to beware of the moon and stay on the road. Story 32. I had a book of ghosts and folklore when I was a child, and it featured an illustration of a banshee-like figure called something like Hag of the Dribble. It scared me tremendously when I was young. Story 33. It's a toss-up between whether eating a watermelon seed would make a watermelon grow in my stomach or if I could get pregnant by a swimming pool. Story 34. Howard Stern always came across as a creepy, dirty old man. He still does. I could never understand what people saw in him. Story 35. The Game Operation. I received it as a gift during our extended family Christmas, and the buzzing noise startled me. So when the other kids were playing with it, I went and hid in another room. As a child, I remember a documentary or segment on a news program that discussed AIDS and how it could be transmitted through sexual activity. I didn't understand that phrase meant sex, so I was terrified that I could contract it from sharing a bed with someone or if we touched the same sheets. Story 36. A shark was eating me in my waterbed, pool, bathtub, and toilet. I thought it could get me anywhere there was water. I was alone in all these places at 12 years old. I was still scared. Even now, dark water in a pool could hide a shark. Story 37. My parents didn't want us going into their room or closet, so they said there was an ummick in the closet, and if we snooped, it would get us. I always pictured it looking like a coat rack, those tall freestanding ones with the pegs poking out all over the top. We never went in their closet. Story 38. Robots freak me out. I saw a man at a mall when I was little, and he was acting like one. I was terrified, yet I could watch Shields and Yarnell perform the clinkers and love them. Robert Shields was the originator of the robot, which was later used in hip-hop. Story 39. The beam of an old flashlight my brother found in our grandmother's closet terrified me because I thought it was radioactive and would poison me. I crawled behind furniture to escape its light. When I was 10, I was fearful of the day I would eventually give birth. I believed that becoming pregnant was something that happened to all women. I recall the intense terror I felt as I explained my fear of the pain. The adults did not correct me. I also had a fear of being locked in a public bathroom, unable to escape. I worried that the people I lived with would eventually become tired of looking for me and go home, leaving me to die. Not very rational. I wasn't a smart 11-year-old. Story 40. Growing up, our toilet had some rust stains that never went away, even after scrubbing with a toilet brush. I got used to seeing them since I was a toddler. Eventually, my dad used a pumice stone to remove the rust stains, and seeing the toilet so clean gave me an eerie feeling. It felt like looking into someone's eyes that had no iris, just all white. Story 41. I don't like open doors, including closet doors. I am always afraid I might see a shadow figure standing behind them. Story 42. I had a sliding glass door to the backyard in my room. I always thought I was vulnerable to being harmed by someone at night watching me, since it was only glass and vertical blinds that separated me from them. So I moved my bed as far from the glass door as possible to improve my chances of survival. Story 43. The monster in Fern Gully was my biggest fear as a child. Chucky? No. Scream? That's fine. Pet Cemetery? You're telling me my deceased pets can come back to life? Absolutely. But the Fern Gully tar monster? No way. I couldn't watch those scenes alone. I made someone sit in the room with me. Also, the bug under the rug in one of the Dr. Seuss books. Story 44. Bowser in Super Mario 64. I thought he looked really scary. It also didn't help that any time you tried to access a locked door or died in a level, you'd hear him laughing at you. Many things in that game are quite uncanny, especially for a 4-year-old. Story 45. When I went to the bathroom, I had to leave as quickly as possible after flushing, because I believed there could be a monster that appeared when the flush sounded. Afterward, I would jump across the floor and onto the bed to avoid the monster under the bed. However, the silliest fear I had was being terrified of having my blood pressure taken. Story 46. We had to vacate our home due to electrical fire issues. We had a second home on the same property, so we moved next door, and there was never a fire. However, I went next door to our old abandoned house, peered inside, and listened. I heard footsteps pounding down the hallway toward me and ran away in fear. It was just my own heart beating in my ears because it was so quiet. Story 47. My subconscious just existed to terrify me. The basement is unfinished and creepy. The house was a funeral home before we bought it. I slept on the first floor because I would have nightmares about worms from tremors popping out of the floor and eating me. Remember, there is a basement. There is a tree that is angled slightly towards the house. I kept thinking it would fall into the house. Then, the tree next to it was struck by lightning, fell onto the house, but then bounced off the house. There are ghosts in the house, especially the girl who took her own life in the attic. I just didn't like being in a dark room. But then the ghost saved our lives. Carbon monoxide at 2 a.m. when the chimney bricks fell and crushed the heat exhaust. Dad woke up, woke Mom, who felt bad vibes, and woke us up and got us out of the house. I don't know about all of that. Story 48. Getting my hair washed. I feel super excited and run around the house screaming, hiding in the same place behind my grandmother's living room chair. Story 49. Moontrap, hands down. Killer robots, it's spooky. Story 50. Large groups of birds remind me of Final Destination 2. I still feel uneasy when I see a large group of birds, and I am 31. Story 51. I was always scared of tornadoes as a kid. I was fascinated by them but would never want to see one in real life. Story 52. I used to have a recurring nightmare that the devil was coming to get me and he was ice cream. Anyway, I still don't like it. That and sharks. I saw Jaws and couldn't go underwater because I thought a shark would get me, even in our pool. Kids are weird, but I'm actually 44 and still weird. I'm also still scared of sharks. Story 53. There are so many fears I had as a child that I don't even know where to begin. For starters, I was afraid of any body of water, including pools. I was terrified of sharks, which made me unable to take a shower with the shower curtain closed. To help alleviate my fear, my mother would sit in the bathroom with me for years, allowing me to use the curtain without getting the floor soaked. Although I still have a residual fear, I can now shower with the curtain closed at 30 years old. I hated closing my eyes while washing my hair or face because, when I did, I would envision horrific things such as bugs crawling, and I often ended up getting soap in my eyes. I was afraid of the shower wall itself because I had an irrational fear of characters like Jason or Leatherface, or even the shark from Jaws, jumping through it and getting me. Additionally, I feared getting sucked down the bathtub drain and was terrified of mummies, the Easter Bunny, and even Santa Claus at one point. I was extremely avoidant of the metal grates at the bottom of Hotel Lazy Rivers because I thought staff members had a button they could press to release barracudas or sharks. At one point, I was even afraid of elderly people, which sounds mean but stemmed from regular visits to the nursing home to see my great-grandmother. As a child, I hated being touched and having my cheeks pinched by other residents during my visits. I was deathly afraid of leaving my bedroom door open because of a laundry basket in the hallway that eerily resembled a troll standing outside my door. I experienced quite a lot of health issues as a child, which heightened my paranoia. I once told my parents I thought I had vein cancer and even prostate cancer, which was amusing since I am a woman. There is a major theme involving showers in my life, reflecting a love-hate-fear relationship. After almost drowning in the ocean and pools multiple times as a child, my fear of water remains valid. I also had a significant belief as a child that God had chalkboards for every human being, and that whenever someone cursed or did something bad, he would mark a tally for that person. Essentially, I believed we were all being scored or rated by God not from belief but purely from fear. My family wasn't religious, but I was such a fearful child that the thought of going to hell or facing judgment for cursing terrified me. Thankfully, those thoughts and my attempts to save other kids from damnation stopped before I reached 6th grade. Story 54. A poster from the movie Monkey Shine. I shared a room with my 2 older brothers. They told me that if I went into the room alone at night, the monkey would jump out and kill me. This was, of course, after they showed me the movie while my parents were away. Story 55. When I was in 1st grade, another child told me that the school staff had the authority to harm students. One day, I was sitting in the principal's office, genuinely believing I was going to face severe consequences because I had thrown a rock. It was quite foolish and very upsetting. Story 56. I was terrified of accidentally consuming anything synthetic, even just a little, such as soap, makeup, or shampoo. When I was very young, I caught a butterfly and put it in one of those bug cages. I tried to feed it a Snickers bar and thought it would be even prettier if it had sparkles. So I used some cheap sparkly spray from a store on it. Obviously, it died, either from that or from being kept in a tiny mesh cage in my closet with nothing to eat except a chunk of Snickers for 2 days. I became convinced that if I ever got anything that wasn't food in my mouth, I would be poisoned. This belief lasted a couple of years until I realized I was not dying. Story 57. All those McDonald's land characters still scare me, but not as much. Also, the McDonald's Moonhead Man from the 70s. Story 58. This is going to sound strange, but I have an attraction to tall, dark-haired men with dark complexions. I don't know why. My parents said that I had to sleep in a different house when my dad's fantasy football friend would come over because I would be inconsolable. I also vividly remember being scared of 2 of my uncles. I was very young when all of this occurred, and although I grew out of it, it feels weird and goofy to think about. Story 59. Butterflies. My first encounter was face-to-face instead of with pretty wings. I was convinced that they would burrow under my skin and eat me from the inside out. Story 60. I had an X-ray at the dentist and I was petrified, thinking it was a gun that would shoot me. I did not get X-rays that day, but I have had plenty in later years. Story 61. The movie Ernest Scared Stupid gave me nightmares about trolls and not having milk. I still refuse to watch it again to this day. Story 62. I couldn't sleep for 2 nights straight because of that scene in Superman 3 where the lady gets trapped in the Brainiac computer and turned into a robot zombie. It wasn't a terrible movie, but that scene was particularly disturbing. Story 63. Photos of the sun evoke a realization of its vastness from science fiction movies and science class. The heat it generates is immense. Just looking at a realistic picture gives me chills. I once misspelled a word while searching for something, and images of the sun appeared. I shut my eyes tightly until I managed to close the tab. The funny thing is that I didn't attempt to look at pictures of the sun again, so I don't know if they disappeared. I'm pretty sure I still feel anxious. Story 64. There's a Muppet named Uncle Deadly who scared me as a kid. He's my favorite now. Story 65. I couldn't eat Fruit Loops for a long time as a kid because my brothers told me there were worms at the bottom of my bowl that my mom poured for me. Story 66. As long as my body was under the covers, spirits could not hurt me. It didn't matter that my head and neck were exposed. Those areas were safe, just the rest of my body. Story 67. The movie, The Grudge. When the woman was first turned around, terrified me. But it also made me a bit tougher. I am striving to find someone who can scare me that much. Story 68. Elevators. I used to be so afraid of getting stuck in one that I would climb multiple flights of stairs to avoid them. Story 69. Nuclear weapons. I had convinced myself that it couldn't happen during the day and only at night, so I would stay awake until the sun came up. It was after seeing a photo of a person who died in Iraq from a missile. Story 70. The trolls in Ernest Scared Stupid appear cartoonishly silly to adults. However, what truly terrified me as a child was not just their appearance but the fact that they transformed kids into wooden dolls. I was generally more afraid of concepts than the physical looks of things. Story 71. Those small tractor-like sprinklers that move across the lawn remind me of my grandparents' yard. I often had nightmares about it chasing me down their street. Story 72. Vacuum cleaner. It lived in my closet, and I thought it would come out and eat me. Pumpkins made Halloween interesting. Story 73. Getting locked in the mall or any large store at closing time would make me panic when they announced, "Shoppers, the store is closing in 5 minutes." I would cry and beg my parents to leave. Story 74. My neighbor's backyard gate made me think he could jump out and discipline me if I did something wrong. So, I always rode my tricycle quickly past his yard, referring to it as the discipline gate. Story 75. The opening to Young and the Restless, particularly one version from the early 1980s, features prominently. There was also a red utility closet door at a pizza shop in the mall that creeped me out for some reason. And then there's Phil Collins. Story 76. The Bloody Mary in the Mirror Story. Someone told me about it once when I was a child, and I'm still spooked in my 30s. Story 77. The Where's My Toe? Story from Are You Afraid of the Dark? I remember losing sleep because it scared me so much. Story 78. Plugging things in because I was scared of getting electrocuted. I think I might have experienced a mild electrical shock once, and that triggered my fear. Story 79. El Chuchui. I was convinced that my blanket didn't cover my back completely, and if I got off my bed in the middle of the night, he would snatch me up and take me to the mountains. Story 80. I'm pretty sure the pool monster episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark is the direct cause of my thalassophobia. Story 81. I would jump out of bed at night because I believed there was a monster living under my bed. I avoided flushing the toilet at night, fearing the devil would come up and get me, and I worried someone would kidnap me through my window. This lasted until I was about 10 years old. I still dislike flushing the toilet at night. It's a sensory issue for me. It's just too loud. Story 82. This sketch of the Night Stalker Richard Ramirez. To be fair, he was killing people in neighboring cities, and I was only about 7 or 8 years old. We didn't have regular permanent windows. They were small glass slats that could have easily been removed, allowing him to come in and harm us. Story 83. My brother and I were scared of the toilet. More specifically, we feared the sound it made when it was flushed. There was something wrong with the pipes, and after the flush, a long, deep, dreadful moaning sound would come from somewhere in the wall or floor. We would always use the bathroom and wash our hands, open the door, make sure we had a clear route, then push down on the handle and run for it. We used to half joke that a ghost lived in the toilet. One weekend, our stepbrother came over and camped out in the bathroom for a while with explosive diarrhea, and then he flushed the toilet. The usual deep moan started and then abruptly increased in pitch and volume until it reached comical heights. We practically died laughing. It sounded like the ghost was commenting on how stinky his poop was. We were never quite as scared after that. Story 84. For some reason, the Scooby-Doo episode with the spooky space kook genuinely scared me, as did those documentaries about true crime stories my parents would watch. I used to think that things like that could happen to me. More specifically, the documentary about JonBenet Ramsey being killed in her house really affected me. I always thought if it could happen to her, it could happen to me too. Story 85. The sound the toilet made when it flushed would make me run as fast as I could out of the bathroom. Honestly, it still bothers me now, but I am just used to it and no longer afraid of it. Story 86. Mirrors in dark rooms, where I can see my silhouette but only a vague version of my features, scared me, and still does at my age. Story 87. My older brother and his friends convinced me, as a prank, that when people kissed each other, that is where babies came from. Since preschool, I was terrified. Aunts, uncles, and kids all thought my cheek was too cute and kissable. Story 88. I once had a dream that a skeleton's arm reached down from the chimney and tickled me. I didn't go near the fireplace for years. Story 89. All my fears were legitimate. Like Freddy Krueger in my closet. My brother locking me in the garbage bin again. My parents fighting nonstop, and having a drunk man pass out in my bedroom. He didn't touch me, but I thought he might have. Story 90. I saw a Fiji mermaid on the Washington coast in a tourist shop of curiosities. I thought it might crawl out from under the couch I was sleeping on and attack me. Yes, it was pretty silly. Story 91. Barney the purple dinosaur. Something about that wide grin, made up of a single tooth above and below, and those beady, creepily human-like eyes unsettled me. As a child, I loved dinosaurs, but he was the one notable exception. Story 92. People dressed in white just like the first 2 years of my life, or so I'm told. I was born 2 months early when this was still a true emergency situation. Apparently, I needed many injections, including iron, which were administered by nurses wearing white clothing. The assumption is that I associated white with pain. Anecdote. The butcher my parents used to visit was a childless couple, not by choice. The woman, as my mom tells me, adored infants and wanted to cuddle them. Whenever I caught a glimpse of her in her white apron, I would scream as if I were about to be dragged back into a torture chamber, supposedly breaking her heart. Story 93. People in wheelchairs. I would never want to be near my grandpa on my mom's side. It makes me feel upset because he died before I was old enough to cope with that. Story 94. Every single night for years, I was convinced there was a man lurking on our semi-wraparound porch and peering into all our windows. I'm talking about over a decade of this. I developed insomnia at a very young age and probably started to hallucinate due to exhaustion because many nights I saw the man. Story 95. For some reason, taller guys scared me. My sister had a friend whose brother was taller than me, and every time I saw him, I screamed and ran to my parents. My sister and her friend found this funny, so every day after school, they would get him just to see me freak out. Another time, whenever I saw my neighbor's son, I felt nervous because he was also tall. My family, however, thought I was just shy and had a crush on him, so they teased me about it a lot. No, Mom, I wasn't in love with him. I just had an unusual fear of really tall guys for some reason. Story 96. The animatronic for Falker in the film The Neverending Story creeped me out, and I would cry anytime someone put that movie on. My older sister sometimes played it to mess with me on purpose. Story 97. Everything about Alice in Wonderland does not resonate with me from start to finish. The caterpillar, the disappearing cat, the eccentric twins, and the queen with her peculiar followers do not appeal to me. I'm done. Story 98. Tornadoes. I grew up in Massachusetts without tornadoes. I had an irrational fear during every thunderstorm that I would get swept away by a tornado, so I would often tie myself to a pole in the basement for safety. I also had a fear of something grabbing my ankles when I got into bed at night. Therefore, I would get a running start and long jump into bed. Story 99. The Bloody Mary tour boat in California had pots and pans that flew up, and the strings were even visible. To this day, I still don't know what about it made me cry. I was about 12 years old. Story 100. We had a vacuum cleaner with a large bag. My mom must have forgotten it and left it in the corner of my room one night. I woke up in the middle of the night, which often happens, and thought it was a genie from a lamp, like in I Dream of Jeannie. Terrified me. I had no idea why it would scare me. She didn't belong in the corner of my room, and I wondered what she was going to do. Story 101. Diesel-powered Range Rovers from the 1980s were so loud they used to frighten me when they drove past. Story 102. In Brazil, when I was about 3 years old, there was a man in a small truck who sold grapes from crates in the back. He used a megaphone to advertise his grapes, and all I remember was hearing his voice, which terrified me at the time. One day, the housekeeper spoke to him, and while I was hiding in my room, he called through the megaphone, echoing around the street. I am very nice and just selling my grapes. Please don't be scared. It was so sweet. I cherish that memory. Story 103, My Shadow. It took my parents a while to help me understand that it is a friend who follows me everywhere. Story 104. My mom told me that if I don't wash my face every evening, I will wake up as a witch the next day. I forgot to wash my face at a sleepover and woke up just fine. I stopped doing it then. Story 105, Johnny Bravo. I don't know if it was how he was drawn or what, but I would freak out anytime my dad watched it. He's a fan of 90s and early 2000s cartoons and has a huge collection of DVDs. Story 106, The Color Red. I honestly don't have a good explanation. When I was in elementary school, I was scared to use anything that was red. Oddly, when I reached 6th grade, there was a period of time when I was obsessed with the color. I was, and still am, a weird person. Story 107. I was scared of choking on cheese. In the scene from Dumb and Dumber where the villain chokes on rat poison, I was convinced he choked because of cheese for some reason. I wouldn't eat pizza or anything with cheese, even though I loved it, for several months. Story 108. Scratch from Ice Age. The video that the movie first came out on featured a mockumentary on Scrap. My young mind turned that into a nightmare where Scrat broke through the ice and smashed my bedroom window to get me because apparently I had the last acorn in existence. I woke up crying and couldn't watch Ice Age for a long time. Story 109. My mom had a porcelain Raggedy Ann doll that terrified me. My dad would tap it on the face to show me it was harmless, but I was always convinced it would open its mouth, revealing sharp teeth, and bite his finger off. Eventually, they had to lock it in my dad's workshop to ease my discomfort. I still don't know why it scared me or why I thought it would have sharp teeth. Story 110. When I was a child, I once watched a scientific documentary about black holes and was so terrified that I ran to my mom, screaming, "Mom, I don't want to be an astronaut." She was surprised and said, "No one forces you to be one, dear." I calmed down a bit but remained afraid of black holes as if they were an everyday danger until I was about 8 or 10 years old. Story 111. I was absolutely horrified by the sound of water going down the drain after a bath. To this day, I feel my heart rate increase when I hear that sound. I don't know why. Story 112. The flat we lived in was on the first floor of a 120-year-old house in the center of the city. There were 3 more floors above, but all the neighbors passed away that same year. They were very old, so we were completely alone there. The flat had a huge corridor extending from the living room to my bedroom, and I was terrified of it. I used to hear whispers and something calling my name, so I always ran like crazy when I needed a glass of water in the middle of the night. Years later, my mom confessed that she also felt very uneasy there, despite being a complete skeptic. Story 113. Clowns. I still don't trust them. I had a clown lamp as a child about 25 years ago, and I swear it seemed evil. It gave me nightmares, and I don't know if I thought it was alive or looking at me, but thinking about it gives me the willies. I also had a Bozo the Clown tape in black and white when I was that young, which I refused to watch because I believed he was going to crawl out of the screen. Story 114. The Gremlins, Chucky, Freddy Krueger, and IT. Why were my parents playing these films in my presence? God knows, it was the 90s. Story 115. My mom dated a terrible person when I was about 8. When she wasn't around, He would tell me they planned to put me up for adoption because they wanted to start a new life without me. Of course, the fastest way for that to happen was if I said anything to her about the plans. Then she would know I was a tattletale and I would have to be moved out quickly. I was terrified of this idea. I remember the day she came home feeling overwhelmed with emotions. I asked, "What happened?" She said, "A family friend shot and killed him." I can't recall ever being so happy about someone's death in my entire life. The family friend became my hero for the 20 years he was imprisoned, until he got out and tried to sleep with me. Story 116. The lobby in our apartment building felt inhabited by robots, and I was reluctant to go down there alone. Story 117. Drive-by shootings, and I lived in the safest suburb. I put my mattress on the floor. I do live 5 minutes from Memphis, though, so maybe I am not so paranoid after all. Story 118. The triangular space between the bed and the corner of the room has a large spider ready to bite your hand. Story 119. I was scared of everything as a kid, but the most irrational fear was a ticking noise I could hear at night. I don't know what it was. Kept me up all night. I would wake my dad, and when he came to listen, it would stop. When he left, it would start up again. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Another fear was the theme tune from Goosebumps. I would cover my ears so I couldn't hear it, and at night I would try to sing myself to sleep because I was worried the song would pop into my head. Story 120. I had a blue carpet in my room and watched Jaws. I was convinced that Jaws was underneath, swimming. Story 121. I couldn't stand being in a room at night that didn't have the windows covered. I was convinced monsters were outside looking in. Story 122. Taxes. I think it was around the time of the poll tax riots. It really scared me that there was this complicated matter that involved a lot of math and that you had to manage throughout your entire adult life. If you didn't do it correctly, you might go to prison. Story 123. In kindergarten, I was afraid of kids leaving the water running for too long while washing their hands, thinking it would flood the whole building and we would drown, as I didn't know how to swim. When watching DVDs, there was one company logo that I was extremely afraid of. I would always run to another room, cover my ears, and close my eyes. The imagery and the strange music still give me the creeps. Story 124. Televisions and computer screens turned off after watching or using them. That sudden dead darkness felt like an empty soul that was once alive. Whenever I wanted to use the family computer or watch television, I always had to have someone nearby until I was about 7. I think I had someone turn it off for me while I made a run for it. Story 125. Where I grew up in Nova Scotia, at my cousin's house outside of Halifax, they had a very nice and spacious house in the middle of the woods. Train tracks were a few acres away from their property. The guest room was at the far corner of the house, which had 6 bedrooms, and the train would pass late into the night, blowing its whistle as it went by. The train whistle would echo through the forest, haunting the woods with its sound. Faintly at first, then louder as it passed, and then faint again. I can still hear it in my head as I am writing this. I always thought of it as a ghost train, since it would sound that way through the echo of the forest. Story 126. There was a tree outside my bedroom window that, at night, cast a shadow resembling a witch flying on her broom. Story 127. Bugs crawling in my nose, ears, or mouth while sleeping, and sprinting down the basement stairs, of course. Story 128. The smoke detector. When I couldn't sleep, I would go into my parents' room, but to do so, I had to leave my room and walk under the smoke detector. I would spend what felt like minutes just staring up at it. I'm not really sure what scared me about it. Maybe it was the knowledge that it was there in the event of a fire. I don't know. Story 129. My grandma, when we would visit her house, would pull out an animatronic James Brown toy that danced and sang, "I feel good," whenever I misbehaved. If you know that song, the first part is a yell. I would literally scream and cry. I still can't listen to that song without feeling mildly panicked. It also comes to mind whenever I think about doing something wrong. Story 130. The Jaws ride at Universal Studios. The logical part of me knew it was a fake shark, but it scared me so much that I broke down in tears. Story 131. I had a front door with a half oval of glass at the top. When it got dark outside, I would play my video game, and every time I heard a noise or saw a light, I would look up and expect to see a face or someone looking in. It got so bad that I put a towel up to block the window. Story 132. Stairs, specifically the type with a gap, always made me think I would fall through. Story 133. I thought E.T. was hiding in our house under the bed and in the closet. Years later, I realized that my dad had videotaped the movie, but he started recording too late. The movie always began with E.T. already in the kid's house. I had no idea how he got there, so as a child, I just feared he could show up anytime, anywhere, even though he was a friendly alien. Story 134. My mom often talked about ending her life. Back then it terrified me. The thought of losing her was overwhelming. However, if she were to take that step today, I wouldn't feel sad or afraid. I would feel relieved that I would no longer have to endure her negativity and pretend to be forgiving and kind after everything she has done. Story 135. Accidentally ingesting seeds from edible fruits and vegetables and fearing that they would grow inside me. Somehow, I forgot that plants also needed sunlight and soil, at least mostly. Story 136. When I was a kid, I believed my teddy bears were alive and watching me. I made my parents take all of them out of my room before I went to bed. Story 137. We had a tall, old oak tree next to the house. On windy nights, the branches would hit the roof and siding, creating a loud scratching sound. I slept on the top bunk bed and heard that noise all the time. I thought it was monsters on the roof digging into the attic to come and get me. Story 138. Other children with smooth brains drove me crazy by singing Afro Circus and similar songs, especially since I was emotionally mature at a younger age. Story 139. The shark scene in Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. I watched it when I was 19. I was prepared with my hands over my eyes, just peeking through gaps in my fingers. I laughed when I saw what actually happens. I can't believe that used to terrify me as a kid. Story 140. Fire drills. Elementary school teachers loved frightening me with drills during the first year of school. Story 141. Wearing ties, I had dreams that my tie would get so tight around my neck that it would take off my head. Story 142. I don't know what movie it was, but I saw a scene in which a worm crawled through a guy's belly button violently. To a 4 or 5-year-old, that was traumatizing. I hated anything to do with belly buttons for years. I think I was 9 when it finally relaxed. Another fear I had was of water. This was because I was forced to get into a pool at around the age of 2, even though I couldn't swim. That messed up my perception of water. I remember screaming that I was too little when my parents tried to get me into the water. I was about 3.5. That fear lasted until I was 4, so it wasn't that long, but it felt very significant at the time. I'm fine now, though. Story 143. My grandmother put a picture of Jesus in my room. It's when he is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. In the picture in my room, he is actually looking at you. I didn't like Jesus looking at me when I was standing in front of him in my underwear or completely naked, so I asked my mom to remove it. When my mom told my grandmother, they both laughed for a painfully long time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.